A God who suffers? Preposterous. And yet that is exactly what we say in the Apostles' Creed. Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. Once again, the Creed draws a line in the sand about who Jesus is and what it means to believe in him. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Tuesday, June 27th, 2023. The suffering of Christ was a point of contention in the early church. It even proved to be a bit of a barrier to evangelism, as people steeped in Greek philosophies and mythologies had a hard time believing in a God who suffered, let alone died. Suffering and death, in their mind, did not signal victory, but defeat. And remember our friends the Gnostics? Suffering was something that happened to physical beings. Immaterial souls simply cannot suffer. Therefore, the idea of Jesus actually suffering under Pontius Pilate was an intolerable notion, reinforcing the physical life of the real man, Jesus. They believed that he only seemed to be a human being, but was really an immaterial spirit who by definition could not suffer. So the Creed continued in this phrase to defy the Gnostics in the church. But surely there's more at stake than simply a rhetorical poke in the eye aimed at the Gnostics, and indeed there is. The church has found in his suffering an indispensable element in our atonement. Different theologians have interpreted it differently, but all regard it as a critical piece of the puzzle. Reformers, such as John Calvin and the Westminster Divines, regarded it as supporting what is called substitutionary atonement, or the idea that Jesus suffered the punishment that we humans deserve. By this accounting, Jesus substituted his own body to receive the punishment with which God would justly punish us for our sins. Others frame it in terms of his obedience. His willingness to suffer on our behalf is seen as perfect obedience, which is in turn counted as our obedience. It is called imputed, because his perfect obedience is credited or imputed to us, even when we fail in our obedience. And still others see the suffering of Christ as an example for us to follow, an example which also encourages us to live lives of obedience to God. Perhaps the most relevant biblical text regarding the suffering of Christ comes, ironically, from the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament. In the last of the so-called suffering servant passages between Isaiah chapters 42 and 53, we read, "Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth." Other translations and older translations of this passage used to use the word stripes instead of bruises. With his stripes we are healed. Now, while this passage is highly suggestive, it doesn't necessarily point to any one particular way of understanding how the servant's suffering, how Christ's suffering benefits us, only that the result of his suffering is for our healing. All theory aside, all four Gospels attest to Jesus' suffering under Pontius Pilate, which underlines its importance to the early church. His suffering under Pilate was not only his humiliation at being tried in a public way, but also his flogging, a brutal punishment that itself would not only have been painful, but could have led to Jesus' death simply from shock at the loss of blood. The church's ongoing fascination with Christ's suffering is witnessed by Mel Gibson's 2004 movie, The Passion of the Christ, which uses not only the gospel accounts, but other non-biblical accounts as well. Different people derive different meanings from the event, but because of our own experience of suffering, we can easily understand something of the depth of Christ's suffering, even if we can't always agree on how it works to impact our lives. Whether as substitution for our justly deserved punishment, perfect obedience credited to us, or as a witness to what obedience to God looks like, his suffering captures us and speaks deeply to something inside us, even if we can't always name that something. Its power continues to resonate with us. Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, a true human being who experienced true and searing pain, and all for us. Tomorrow, the power of redundancy in language. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do, this day and in all the days ahead.